Washington Journal continues.
A new Texas abortion law went into effect on Wednesday, and here to talk about it with us is Nan Aaron, who is president of the Alliance for Justice Action Campaign, and Charles Donovan, who is president of the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning.
Nan Aaron, let me start with you first about the Alliance for Justice, your organization's mission and funding. Tell us a little bit about that.
Alliance for Justice, thank you for having me. Alliance for Justice is a national association of civil rights, women's rights, environmental, consumer, LGBTQ organizations. It's been in existence now for 42 years. One of its major programs is a focus on the federal judiciary, and we have been reviewing, commenting on federal judges since the early 1980s.
And Charles Donovan, the Charlotte Lozier Institute, tell us about your mission and your funding.
Sure, we're a relatively young nonprofit. We're formed of a small staff of 10 and about 65 associated scholars, 2/3 of whom are women. They tend to be statisticians, medical people, and our theme is science and statistics for life. We're privately funded and relatively modest in size compared to our opponents on some issues.
Let me start by asking you both. You'll both have different views on this legislation and its effect, and that's why we have you on to speak with our listeners and viewers this morning. So, Nan Aaron, let me ask you two things. One, about the action taken by the Supreme Court Wednesday evening, and two, more broadly, about this new Texas law itself. What do you think it means for the future of Roe v. Wade?
Certainly it means that in Texas, Roe v. Wade is no longer applicable. It will make it impossible, nearly impossible, for women in that state to access abortion. It will ban abortion after 6 weeks, and equally reprehensible, it will encourage anyone in the state or out of the state to sue a doctor, an abortion provider, anyone who lends money to a woman to get an abortion, an Uber driver. It will encourage them to sue those people, and if successful, win a cash prize of $10,000 and attorney's fee awards. This was an act by the Supreme Court which was incredibly cowardly. It was made in the dead of night, no lengthy substantive opinion, no oral arguments. It was simply an order handed down by the court, which will affect the lives of millions of women. And make no mistake, women will die because of this action. And I will also say that while Texas is certainly the target today, other states, South Dakota, Florida, Arkansas, are also considering enacting similar laws. So this has huge implications for women in this country, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades.
And Charles Donovan, your take on the effect of the law on Roe v. Wade down the road and the action taken by the Supreme Court on Wednesday evening.
Well, it's almost exactly the opposite, but for pretty much legal grounds. Now, I respect the legal expertise on the other side, but the court acted in the middle of the night because the petitioners, in this case, the abortion clinics, brought their action to the Supreme Court 2 days before the implementation deadline of the statute. The Supreme Court didn't act because it really had no provenance to act. There was no controversy below. There was no hearing. There was no oral argument. When I hear that, I think of Roe v. Wade itself, which was pretty much a dead of the night decision by the Supreme Court without oral argument, without significant briefs back and forth to the court. The other thing is the court didn't rule on the substance. We don't know where the court's going to go with this. It's basically saying to the courts below, bring us a controversy. I think the plaintiffs went out and found 8 people in Texas to sue, none of whom had done anything to effectuate the statute. So I think it's premature to judge it. I think I should remain on Mississippi and its 15-week limit, which is by all standards a liberal limit on abortion. I think we've got some distractions going on here for PR purposes.
Let me ask you both to explore a little more the enforcement provisions. There's an opinion piece this morning in the Wall Street Journal that's headlined Texas's abortion law blunder. They say the court was right not to interfere for now, but the statute won't survive. They say that the law sets an awful precedent that conservatives should hate. Could California allow private citizens to sue individuals for hate speech, or New Yorkers deputize private lawsuits against gun owners? Dan Aaron.
Well, yes. I mean, just imagine the repercussions from this law. People in states could sue individuals who aren't wearing masks and receive a beautiful cash prize. They could sue gun owners in states around the country. The examples are huge. In fact, it is so egregious that I've been surprised to see how few Republicans have actually spoken out in support of what the Supreme Court did. I think they know in their heart of hearts they can't. I know they know how reprehensible this law is. And in fact, it wasn't just the dead of night. The law was constructed as a trick, as a con game, to allow the states to be exempted from coverage, but frankly, to put the onus of responsibility and accountability on anyone. And I think people across the political aisles are going to see just how dangerous this law is. And in fact, I think it's important to note the Supreme Court did act. It didn't just pull away from action here. They made a decision. They allowed this law banning abortion in Texas to go forward. This is not at all surprising from the 5 justices who were appointed to the Supreme Court, specifically with the idea of overturning Roe versus Wade. This is something that we expected, but I should also mention, as Justice Sotomayor says, it is stunning. It is absolutely stunning.
And Charles Donovan, on the enforcement provisions, do you think that those will hold up under future Supreme Court scrutiny? And do you see them as being a model for other states in considering abortion legislation?
Look, Texas is unique so far. It may remain that way. It may be that an attempt would be made by, let's say, a parent. Now that we're moving toward chemical abortion, parent finds that their 14-year-old child has been given abortion pills by an abortion provider or by someone who's an advocate or someone who has delivered them from overseas factories, which is now a policy of the organizations that advocate for abortion. I think there are potential very just uses of this statute. We're going to have to wait and see. But here's the problem. The Supreme Court attempted to resolve a national abortion policy in 1973. They did it out of the blue. It wasn't briefed. It wasn't argued. They reconsidered it. They timed it politically to be after the 1972 election. And they created a law that allows abortion until birth. We're one of 7 countries, maybe 8 worldwide, that allows elective abortion till birth. The real drama is probably in Mississippi, which has said 15 weeks is plenty. Let's protect babies at mid-trimester. Most Americans support that. What I like is that here we are in Washington Journal. I'm sitting debating with Dan Aaron. We don't agree on much, but this is the way it should be. Americans should debate and confer on the issues, draft statutes, defend them, and then come back in the next session if something goes amiss. We've gotten away from that. It's part of the reason why we're a polarized country.
Well, Dan Aaron, in terms of the Mississippi case that the court will hear, tell us a bit more about that. And do you think that will further muddy the issue of where Roe v. Wade stands or clarify it?
Well, that's a case that will be heard this next term involving 15 weeks. outlawing abortion. After that, it is a direct attack on Roe versus Wade. I think we saw a few days ago where the Supreme Court is heading, and certainly if that Supreme Court upholds the Mississippi law, we will have effectively overturned Roe versus Wade for the entire country. I should also make a point that hasn't yet been mentioned. This law in Texas affects every woman, rich or poor, but it will fall most heavily on those women without the financial means to go to New York, California, or another nearby state. It will fall heavily on Black women, Latinas, LGBTQ women, Indigenous women. This law is going to punish women at the margins without the finances to be able to get on a plane, drive a car, to get an abortion. It is that venal. It is that evil.
The law is called the Texas Fetal Heartbeat Law. It went into effect on Wednesday. It would ban abortion once a fetal heartbeat is detected. And in this law, there are no exemptions in the cases of rape or incest. We welcome your calls and comments for Nan Aaron, president of the Alliance for Justice Action Campaign, and Charles Donovan, who is president with the Charlotte Lozier Institute. 202-748-8000 is the line for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and for independents and others, 202-748-8002. Charles Donovan, a caller in a previous segment, raised the issue of this law prevents abortions, even in the cases of rape and incest, and raised the issue of what if a rapist were one of those filed a civil suit against the abortion provider of the person he has raped. Does that exist possibly under this Texas law?
I think it's an extremely remote situation. I think it's exactly the kind of the application of the law that would lead to litigation. I wouldn't expect it to progress very far. There are a number of states that actually bar parental rights for someone who's committed an act of rape. We would support that. So I think it's a bit of a bogus extremism. Look, we're asking the court, or at least what the court was asked 2 days ago, to speculate, to make up its own cases about what might happen under the statute. As I say, I think it's more likely to be applied by a mother who learns her 14-year-old daughter was given abortion pills without her knowledge and finds her hemorrhaging at home. Who knows how that would work? But look, at the end of the day, the American people can debate these differences. We don't want this as a national issue forever. We don't want abortion all the way to birth. We don't want sex selection abortion, all the things that the Alliance for Justice and others advocate. Those are the real issues, not Texas's gambit here with the Supreme Court, which I say is quite inconclusive at this point.
And Nan Aaron, in some cases, the abortion laws from some states have been sort of fast-tracked, it seems, through the federal system to the Supreme Court. But that won't be the case with this Texas law, correct? It has to work its way through the system by civil lawsuit.
That's right. And, you know, how ironic. Republicans for years have been criticizing frivolous lawsuits. Every time there's a statute proposed to Congress allowing for attorney's fees for civil rights plaintiffs or whatever, Republicans are up there saying, this is a frivolous lawsuit. Now what this statute is, or what this action is proposed and will certainly come to pass, are hundreds, thousands maybe, of so-called frivolous lawsuits filed, again, not just by people in Texas, but by anyone in the country. I don't think we can downplay what happened at the court. This is something that we expected. In fact, this is what Donald Trump told us was going to happen with the appointment of his 3 justices, all of whom had a record of opposition to Roe versus Wade. Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, likewise, very strong views about abortion. So this is the day that these 5 justices, and imagine it's only 5 justices, have been waiting for. That day came, and we on the other side are going to meet this moment. We will organize a full-scale mobilization. Women will speak up and speak out, and men around and across the country. The Supreme Court has spoken, yes, in an incredibly cowardly way, but we now see what they've said, what they think, what they'll do, and certainly it's a sign of what they will do in a few months in the Mississippi case.
Let's get to our callers in here. First from George in Bloomington, Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning. I have been following your program with interest this morning, as I always do. The first thing I would like to say in response to Ms. Aaron is that her comment just now that the Supreme Court has spoken in an incredibly cowardly way is outrageous, and she ought to be ashamed of herself for having said that. And in support of that, I would cite Professor Jonathan Turley, a highly regarded law professor at George Washington University at GWU, who was on television just yesterday or the day before about this new ruling from the Supreme Court. Mr. Turley is nationally recognized as a fully informed legal analyst, though he is a Democrat from Chicago, but he's not really partisan. He follows the law, unlike Ms. Aaron, and he made it clear that this case is not conclusive, and that the extreme statements about it are out of line and premature, and it was simply a decision not to act in a hasty fashion without even time to brief the issues or have oral argument, and he's absolutely correct. We shouldn't be hollering fire when there's no fire.
Okay, George, and then Aaron, I'll give you a chance to respond to this criticism.
Well, I guess I would say it's easy for you and Jonathan Turley to say this on national TV. Try saying it to the women in Texas, most of whom have lost access to get an abortion in that state. Try telling them, it's really not much. You can ignore it. Really, Supreme Court hasn't spoken. Try telling that to the governors in Florida, South Dakota, Arkansas, who were ready to work with their state legislatures to enact laws, and to the other states in the country who will do similar things. I would say this is a momentous event in the history of the country, and certainly one that is going to have disastrous consequences for women, certainly in that state and others.
We'll go to Ann in Wild Rose, Wisconsin, Democrats line.
Hi, I've got a question. I'm a mother of 7. I'd like to know the Republicans normally don't want to take Medicaid expansion. They don't want to contribute to food stamps or food share. Who's going to support these children when a mother has a child that it's unwanted? And normally, when they see the child, they don't give it up for adoption. So then there's also abuse that happens over the years and frustration with income. Who's going to help these mothers?
Okay. Well, Charles Donovan, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's actually a lot of consensus on amplifying support for women. In Texas, along with this legislation, they passed a $100 million new appropriation. It's not the only money for alternatives to abortion. There's broad agreement on child tax credits. Agreement can be achieved. There are Republican bills on family leave, on parental leave. I think we're going to see a lot more of this, but I really think it's a cruel outlook that says, hey, if you're a poor woman, We're worried about that you're not having a flight money to New York. Let's worry about getting support to those women. These babies have a heartbeat. That's the commonality in the Texas statute. All of the babies involved have a heartbeat. They're our children. They're beautiful. They're precious. They're not precious because they're from Grosse Pointe, Michigan. They're precious because they have human rights in the United States. And I think if there's a fresh effort to support these women, as there is in Texas, we can help. In America, you can support 7 kids. I'm glad you're doing it there in Wisconsin. Let's give 4 women a chance to have 1 or 2.
Dan, Aaron, a quick response?
Well, I wish Republican Party would put its energy into supporting and not opposing child care, health care, Medicaid expansion, and the like. Last time I looked at the state of play on national legislation, Republican Party was virulently opposed to expanding those very programs that are the safety valve for women and men to raise healthy children in this country. So I'd like to see Republicans cut the hypocrisy and focus on providing a healthy environment, a safe environment for children.
Let's hear from John in Ann Arbor, Michigan, on the independent line.
Good morning. What bothers me the most about this is this enforcement provision. It seems like it's sort of vigilantism in a way. It's like state-sanctioned vigilantism. And my impression is that the abortion activist groups are going to be bringing lawsuits. And then the other thing about it is the HIPAA violation thing that somebody else brought up is another big problem with this enforcement provision. Thank you.
Okay, John, Charles Donovan.
Well, look, I mean, there are no controversies yet. We don't know how this statute will be implemented. In the event a parent finds their daughter bleeding from a chemical abortion at home because she thought she was 7 weeks of pregnancy, turns out she's 10 or 11, I'm not worried that that parent is going to bring some litigation that would be problematic. So we're going to have to wait and see. Again, the focus of all of the efforts in pro-life is to test this proposition whether the Supreme Court should control this issue top to bottom. It's clear from all those statutes that have been passed within the last year, over 100. We have more than 40 states that want to legislate. We want debates. We are fine with disagreement. We're fine with compromise. We're fine with supporting women in ways that will be actually helpful. And by the way, if you repeal the Hyde Amendment, Medicaid will fund abortion. It's a poison pill. It's what the left would like to do. So common ground will be hard to get if that's the terms of it. But there's a lot of progress to be made. We have radical law in the United States. It's time, and the American people, 30% of whom in the legislature are women, want change as well.
Nan, Aaron, let me ask you about the enforcement provision. The Washington Post, in a story about the rulings, the headline, Justice's Texas ruling illustrates threat to Roe. They write that not all proponents of abortion rights are as pessimistic as those who insisted the 5-4 vote had effectively overruled Roe. The court's order, they write, was based on legal procedure, and it went out of its way to say abortion providers and civil rights group, quote, raised serious questions regarding the constitutionality of the Texas law at issue. Do you think that signals the court is also concerned about these enforcement provisions?
You know, I don't think any of us know the answer to that. The one thing we do know is that these 5 unelected, ultra-conservative, radical justices were put on this Supreme Court with the goal of overturning Roe versus Wade. But I wanted to also just get back to your last questioner, and that is, it is a concern that this law will be enforced not by the state, but by private vigilantes. And Texas actually constructed the statute so that it couldn't be struck down. It removed the state from the enforcement mechanism, making private citizens the plaintiffs. And that's how the Texas legislature kind of went around the law and allowed it to be upheld for now. It was a trick. It was a con. Not so cute, very dangerous. And I think what's most scary is that other states will simply copycat and do the exact same, allowing, as your caller said, private vigilantes to enforce this reprehensible law.
On that enforcement mechanism, Houston Chronicle headline this morning, Texans are trolling an anonymous tip line for reporting suspected abortions. Englewood, New Jersey, David is next on the Republican line.
Yes, I just wanted to say just a couple of things. I'll be real quick. First of all, the founder of Planned Parenthood was one of the biggest racists of all time, and the liberals continue to support this stuff. Margaret Sanger made it very clear that she wanted abortions to be a way to control the number of black folks in this country. And now in New York City, more black babies are aborted than there are born. This has been a trend for several years now. And liberals always claim that we're in favor of minorities. Well, you're really not. And I don't agree with what this law said in terms of no exception for rape or incest. But, abortion is not even listed in the Constitution. And Miss Aaron calls those people that are opposed to this vigilantes. No, they're citizens, Miss Aaron, and it shows you what happens when you stay in Washington, D.C. too long. You're totally out of touch with average people.
David, we'll get a response from Ned Aaron.
Well, I would say just look at the words of the statute. I think that tells you everything you really need to know. The other thing I would say, if you look at the makeup of Planned Parenthood, NARAL, Center for Reproductive Rights, and other pro-abortion organizations in this country, you see a very rich diversity, many viewpoints, many women and men from all walks of life, races. I think it's one of the most diverse constituencies in this country, and certainly a promoting issues that overwhelming majorities of women from all corners of the country agree with. So I think at the moment it's a very wide, diverse constituency of women, and in fact, and importantly, makes up a majority of people in this country. They support a right to abortion. That's what's so important.
Charles Donovan, a question for you on Twitter. Shouldn't the $10,000 reward be given to Children's Aid and not the informants? Is this taxpayer money? How is it funded? By increasing local taxes?
Well, if there are fines paid under the statute, they would be paid by relatively well-funded abortion providers. It's a very lucrative business. I think that might be actually a very good thing to do with the statute, to allow those funds not to go to personal reward. By the way, there are some lefty statutes that allow enforcement of campaign laws by personal intervention. But yeah, I think it might not actually be a bad idea so there's not personal benefit from it. So, but look, at the end of the day, we're going to be having a debate here whether this law in Texas protected babies from 12 weeks, from 15 weeks, from 20 weeks. The Born Alive statute in Congress, when babies are born alive, it's stymied by the Democratic Party, even though 90% of the American public wants it. I don't think this should be a partisan issue. What I do think is that legislatures should be free to debate it, and we should come to agreement on what we can agree on.
Let's hear from Emma in Stockton, California, Democrats line.
Hey, how you doing?
Fine, thanks, Emma.
Good
Go
morning.
ahead. Good morning.
Okay. Yeah, basically I'm really pissed because I don't understand why a man thinks he can rule a woman's, choice or whatever, because he wouldn't even be here if he hadn't came from a woman's womb, And all of a sudden, now he trying to, it's not right. and they ought to know better. You know why? You know you got a mother. You know, and they making these choices. What if your mother was subject to the choices that you making right now? You might not have been here. You know what I mean? So basically, men need to go ahead and do things about the infrastructure, trying to get things on track about what's happening to us in the climate and everything. Stop messing with us. We your mothers.
All right, we're going to go to Kofa in Marietta, Georgia, on the independent line. Good morning.
Morning. I'm a Black American. I'm a descendant of those stolen Africans brought to this country against their will and forced into slavery. It's so ironic. When you look at the argument during slavery, those that were for and those that were against sound just like the arguments making today for those that approve of abortion and those that are against abortion. Sounds ironically the same. And another thing that I wanted to say that I do not like the bait and switch that's used by Ms. Nan and others like her to talk about what's best for poor black women, as though the only thing that they care about poor black women is that whether they can kill their babies. I want to tell you that as a poor black woman myself, that there's a lot of other things that we would like. Like we would like to be able to afford for our children the best education, to live in some of the best places, to be able to take our children on some very good vacations that rich white women get to do. So stop using us as a bait and switch method in order to put forth your ideas. And there's a lot of us black women out here that struggle every day to take care of our children that are against abortion. And I've had 2 children, and I know when life is.
Okay, we'll let you go, Sankova. Ned Aaron, do you care to comment?
Well, I agree that the services programs ought to be available to everyone, rich or poor, men and women. I do think, though, at the end of the day, that every woman, regardless of race, should have the ability to make her own decision. I'm not telling you what decision to make. I'm saying that I think everyone, including Black women, poor women, ought to be able to have the same choice that everyone else in society does. And that choice is yours, not mine to make, it's yours to make, but it's yours to make and not the government's to make. Or in this case, some private vigilante.
I wanted to ask both of you how the Texas law will change, or will it change, the messaging that you have for your supporters on both sides in terms of what's ahead. Charles Donovan, you first.
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see how Texas unfolds. But let's be honest, what the states are doing is amplifying informed consent. They're passing laws that bar discriminatory abortions against children with Down syndrome on the basis of race, sex selection abortions, which those statutes are opposed by the abortion community. We're trying to protect the right of conscience so that Americans are not forced to participate in abortion. Those are the main things. That's not going to change. And we expect resistance on those things as well. Texas, in a way, is to some extent legally right now a bit of a red herring. It's not going to be the next thing at the court. The court has agreed to consider whether the pre-viability baby has any rights. That pre-viability baby can be operated on. It can be transfused. It can receive stem cells. It can be saved in utero. It has a heartbeat. At 6 weeks, it beats at 98 beats per second. My stake in the abortion issue is I spent 9 months in the womb, and my heartbeat was beating at 6 weeks. It's the same one that failed me 3 months ago, and I was well treated and survived. That's what we're asking. Protect these children. Let's have a heart, too.
And then, Aaron, how does this change your messaging at the Alliance for Justice Action Campaign?
I would say that the court has really laid down the gauntlet here. The issue's been joined. In Texas, women will have far less access to abortion, other states as well. The battle will now be in the states around the country. the battle will be nationally. I know that members of the House here in D.C. are talking about codifying Roe versus Wade. We will be working hard for that. We'll be helping groups around the country who are in battles in the states to preserve access to abortion. I think the messaging is now very clear. The assault on abortion has happened, and women are going to speak up. Just listen to women in the 2022 elections coming up in the Senate and House. Women will be there in full force. Just look at what happened after Clarence Thomas was confirmed to a seat in the Supreme Court. Women and men got women elected to the House of Representatives, to the Senate, and got a Democrat in the White House. We are energized. We will be there at the ballot box. We will be there at the state legislatures. We will be there in Congress. It is a full-on effort on our part to reverse what's happened.
And as you touched on, a headline here at the Hill, House to vote on bill guaranteeing abortion access in response to the Texas law. The Speaker making that announcement on Thursday. The House will come back in the next couple of weeks. Rock Island, Illinois is next up, Republican line. April, good morning.
Hi, I'm 50 years old and I've lived in Illinois my whole life. And I know women that have been able to go over to Iowa and get abortions in the first trimester. A couple of years ago, my governor passed a bill saying that women in Illinois could have an abortion up until the day they give birth, even after that, called an infanticide. So anybody in Texas, just come on up to Illinois because you can have an abortion all day, every day.
Okay. Do either of you have a response to that?
No, sadly, it's true. I mean, a number of states have basically done what they called codify Roe. So what the federal bill will do, it's extreme. It will allow no legal protections for any baby, as Hillary Clinton suggested years ago. The baby's a non-entity. None of us really believes that. And it's sad that some states have taken that route, but most don't want to. They want to protect those kids. They want to support their moms. They want a life-affirming direction.
Let's hear from Cleveland, Ohio. Next up, Ron is on our Democrats line. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm kind of split on this. I do believe that if men carried babies, there would be an abortion clinic everywhere there was a Starbucks. I really believe that. But on the other side, I was talking to my sister-in-law who delivers babies, and in this state, there's, I think they said seven reasons why a woman could have an abortion in this particular clinic. And one of them is if the baby is down. And she was telling me that it was her turn to be next to support be in this procedure for an abortion. And she said the baby was 5 months old. They were at the 5-month point, 20 months. The baby was born alive during the abortion, and that for an hour and a half it lived. And the young couple that were having this abortion were wondering, did they make a mistake? And then I had an employee in 2001. I used to have a couple hundred people that in my organization that worked for me. One of my employees' daughter was having an abortion at 8 months, and I tried to I offered her $50,000 if she wouldn't have the abortion and let me and my spouse adopt a child. And I just want to tell you, at what point do you not abort a child? So that's all I want to say.
Okay, we'll get some response from our guests. Nan Aaron.
Look, abortion is one of the most difficult issues that any woman and man can face in life. There's no question about it. But again, as difficult, as complicated, as chilling as that decision is, it's got to be made by the woman who's going to have to raise a child and provide a healthy environment and the like. That decision, as difficult as it is, belongs to that woman and that woman alone.
Let's get one more call and I'll get some final thoughts from the both of you. To Ken in Spokane, Washington. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I just wanted to ask Nan a question. She said in her opening statement that this Texas abortion law would kill women. I would like her to give me 5 examples how this law is going to kill women.
Well, I think the most important example is that after 6 weeks, a woman will not be able to get an abortion in the state of Texas. I think that really says it all. And if she does attempt to go elsewhere, there will be bounty hunters, vigilantes, watching everyone's moves, the abortion clinics, doctors, people who help women pay for abortions, Uber drivers. It's going to turn our states, our counties, our country into a very chilling state of affairs. If that isn't chilling enough, I really don't know what. And the fact that other states are going to pick up on the same thing and enact similar laws, we will be encouraging people to take the law into their own hands. That is a phenomenon in this country that is, to me, an incredibly dangerous road ahead.
And Charles Donovan, some thoughts from you.
Well, look, we hear about the role of men. I think legal abortion until birth, publicly funded, is the perfect out for men who don't want to care for kids. And we have no higher responsibility as men to care for the vulnerable in our midst, to raise them well, to support their lives, and protect them when their little heartbeats start. I don't think that's something we can afford to get away from, but we've gotten away from it in America. Now we have the federal government saying it's going to go full force behind abortion on a request. It's been terrible for men. It has been demeaning for men. And at the end of the day, what we need to do as men and women is come together to support the next generation, care for our offspring, have a heart, and not ignore that little heartbeat.
Charles Donovan is the president of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and Nan Aaron, president of the Alliance for Justice Action Campaign. Thanks to both of you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
The jobs number is out for August. This is the headline here. We'll show you this from the U.S. unemployment from the Labor Department. We'll give you the figures here for August. The unemployment rate dropped to 5.2%, and some 235,000 jobs added in the month of August. More Washington Journal ahead. Up next, we will turn our attention to the future and fate of women and girls in Afghanistan in the aftermath of the Taliban takeover. That conversation with Anita McBride, former Chief of Staff to First Lady Laura Bush, and she's a member of the U.S. Afghan Women's Council.